I will have a very short presentation, and I will today only focus on the project that is presented also within this exhibition, and it was part of the biennial. So it's titled "The News Belongs to Us," and part of it is also the film Newsreel 63, The Train of Shadows. And I will then very shortly also speak about the history of newsreel and give you some reasons why we chose, or within the collective newsreel front, which you also see on the title of this presentation, this very special and very extraordinary format within our practice. So, the core elements of my artistic practice within the last 10 years has been experimentation with visual material that deals with questions regarding migration policies and politics of memory, with an emphasis on the post-Yugoslav space. The practice focuses on the production of particular images, specific construction of collective memory, as well as on personal and oral narratives. It is primarily based on short experimental videos, documentary films, film essays, and installations. Okay. Thinking about suppressed or oppressed lives and hidden and silenced topics in images and words, like my practice usually do, is closely connected with the fact of me being involved in the field of different struggles. Understanding those struggles in the field of image production somehow defined my practice in choosing, using, and understanding the form of the newsreel, essay film, and installations as a potential form of emancipatory and engaged practice in time of urgency and struggle. Through my practice, I try to revisit certain historical moments as well as questions that are part of today's social, economic, and political settings. In last years, I have been researching the topics regarding newsreels and essay films. Newsreel production was historically used for many reasons and purposes, and has an extraordinary life. Looking back, it was used as a weapon of psychological propaganda, or in Vertovian sense for education and information purposes, for political agendas, for strengthening hegemonical structures, but also by left politically and experimental engaged filmmakers, artists, photographers, as a tool in class, racial, workers, and feminist and other struggles. In that particular inscription and appropriation of the historical format lays the ground for further investigation and possibilities for articulation that have shaped and initiated the collective Newsreel Front, a collective of producers from the field of cultural and film theory and art practice active in Slovenia, producing newsreels, essay films, theoretical texts, publications, exhibitions that are usually accompanied by lectures and workshops. Furthermore, the reason for establishing an informal collective was also inspired by a very particular and specific vision of not only trying to create space where intriguing questions about invisible topics would gain visibility, but also thinking how this visibility is constructed and framed on a formal level, meaning thinking about image production itself. In addition to numerous references, filmic devices, and strategies that newsreel front practice draws on, looks to, and borrows from, I would say that the format of the newsreel and its historical contextualization represent the strongest referential point for our artistic as well as theoretical research. As there are many ways and approaches how newsreel front acts, and diverse strategies and tools that it uses, like text production and workshops and all other forms that I already mentioned, I will today mainly focus on the talking about the project titled Newsreel 63, which, as I said, is also presented in this exhibition. Newsreel 63, it's part of, as I already also said, a larger project that was titled The News Belongs to Us. The project itself consisted of archival material, photographs, a book, and of course video, Newsreel 63, which is also presented here. I brought also a book here because I don't know if it's still there. Yes? I didn't know if you also you were selling it. Or? Oh, okay. So just to say a bit about this book was never meant to be kind of a accompanied object that would tell more about the newsreel or the film itself, but was always meant as in this relation, non-hierarchical relation towards the film. And you can, if you want to see it, you can take it there. There are more than 22 contributions that are theoretical, that are essayistic, and that are also visual. So there are different format of texts that you can find inside of the books, and there are also different format of visual interventions. And they all are tackling the topics that also the film is tackling, which means questions and topics regarding traveling, refugees, happiness, voyage, history of engaged and political cinema, etc. So it's this book also doesn't function as a narrative that you would read from the beginning till the end. It has this very fragmented intervention, and we also, the collective Newsreel Front, with which I collaborated on this project, we also thought that this format is the most appropriate, since we are also appropriating the newsreel format, which is always, or it was always a format that was very fragmented. So this is the book. The other part of this project was some archival material, were photographs, were little video interventions that we did, and we usually also adapted to the existing gallery in which we were invited. So we didn't always show everything that we produced throughout the project. And this is one installation view from Vienna exhibition, and another one, and this is from Biennale exhibition. So, and of course, also there is also the film which is exhibited in this exhibition, and I will talk about it a bit later. But first, I would like to show you a short video excerpt. Shred of a video taken with a mobile phone on a once famous Belgrade-Ljubljana rail line called Emuna Express, and before that Sava Express, where refugees now travel not in couchettes but between the train wheels, was given to me by refugees in early 2016, when so-called Balkan route was still open. I kept it for many months, and it triggered many questions. It triggered questions about the relation that one can have towards the images. I was wondering what my or our relation towards this particular image was. With me, I mean our privileged position as the owners of European passports. Was I its keeper or its guardian? Was I the one in the position to make this image visible, and if so, in what way? In what context should such image be inscribed, and what is the appropriate or right frame and format in which such image can be positioned? What Newsreel 63 does is it tries to position and understand this particular image by posing such questions. Nevertheless, throughout the script, it brings in front questions about the right to be inscribed into the existing visual history representing trains. Pursuing these questions through many examples and references from film history, the film ends with documentary footage of the devastated railway station in Belgrade, where the refugees themselves built an improvised camp in January 2017, and from where the 50 seconds mobile shot also originated. The video drifts into a visual investigation of railways and explores its historical, social, and political narrative. The essayistic elements of Newsreel 63 links this historical narrative to our pursuit of happiness, the idea of voyage in the current social constellation, where our longing for happiness is all too often tied to the idea of traveling somewhere, or indeed, the need to secure the means for more basic survival. Newsreel 63 uses film excerpts from existing film history, in a way of found footage, combining them, as I said, with documentary shots done in observational method. The film is divided in 5 chapters, starting with the first Lumiere's film footages, which, how handy, also depicted trains. Screening of those footages in the late 19th century triggered and produced a myth about the fear of the viewers who ran out of the first improvised cinemas, as they understood the image to be too true. The second chapter drifts into the investigation of the idea of shaping the gaze and how trains, which were invented almost 40 years before film, already shaped our gaze in a pre-filming way. Third chapter talks about depiction and representation of homeless people traveling on trains. Film history represented those travelers firstly in comedies and only a few decades later in action and drama films. The fourth chapter drifts into the investigation of representation of trains in Yugoslav cinema and ends on once famous Belgrade train station, which today became kind of a not recognized spot in Balkans where refugees are gathering in order to find a way to enter European Union. So I would like now to shortly explain story about the newsreel, how newsreel emerged in film history, and why did I, and also in collaboration with Newsreel Front, also how did we choose that very special format, which seems to be, or it seemed to be forgotten for many decades. As a film form, the newsreel enters the cinema in the first half of the 20th century as a filmic appropriation of printed media with the purpose of educating and informing the public. It can be considered as an early form of documentary film that regularly, either weekly or monthly, and in unconnected segments, reported clearly on current events. The events were arranged hierarchically, starting with political economic issues, usually followed by something lighter, a report from a sport or cultural event. The reach of the early newsreel was a factual record accompanied by an all-knowing voice of narrator, also called voice of God. With the development and expansion of the newsreel, the form of the anti-newsreel emerged and consolidated as a substantive and formal oppositional accomplice, or so-called anti-informer. The first anti-newsreel can be detected in the early 20s and 30s, when the unions of workers' movements adopted the camera. From the Second World War onwards, and especially during it, newsreel production was an extension of the state, and was used mainly for propagandistic purposes. Due to its impact, quite some time had to pass before the anti-newsreel form could be reappropriated. It is no coincidence that oppositional newsreel journalism appeared in the 60s and 70s. This was a time when individuals all over the world took up the film form that a decade before seemed obsolete and buried. It appeared wherever political and social conditions became aggravated and unjustly affected people's life. Cinema verité, direct cinema, free cinema, cinema tracks in France, the newsreel movement in the States, the newsreel production in the ex-Yugoslav space, and the newsreel movements that were part of the liberation struggles in Latin America. The newly discovered possibility of film as means of empowerment was crucially marked precisely through daring experiments at the formal level. Cineasts and filmmakers, artists, photographers, and other theoreticians combined various genres and characteristics of film language and thus invented new hybrid forms. The film pamphlet, agitational film, the newsreel, essayistic documentary, photo film, compilational films, observational documentaries, etc. The rebirth of political documentary film, which boomed in the 60s all around the world, also emerged in the Yugoslav space. The Yugoslav newsreel and documentary film, or so-called black documentary, that culminated in the 60s and in the beginning of the 70s in the Belgrade School of Documentary Film, arose in time when cinema became a composite, indispensable, and a key part of revolutionary settings and the demands of the marginalized, subjected and less privileged groups all over the world. These documentary essayistic film practices in the former Yugoslavia were a rare but most precious form of political cinema. The resilience of this special film format can be seen especially in the fact that with the introduction of television, the state newsreel declined, whereas its counterpole has gained in strength, emerged and persisted on all the front lines where a new experience tries to shape what I called wordlessness. Travis Wilkerson, Silvar George, and a group of filmmakers and theoreticians gathered around the Internet Journal, now a journal of urgent practices, are just a few of many who today, here and now, attempt to create a new experience, a new image, by using redefined newsreel methods and strategies. The decision to use and affirm the existing form in the history where invisibility and inaudibility are the main attributes of power presupposes taking over what Solanas and Gattino would claim is theirs and should be ours. In these attempts, my practice, or our practice, do not invent new methods of composing the image, sound, and word, but rather strives to determine the position of images and their cuts, in order that the edge whereon this process takes place becomes transformative. Talking about usually becomes what Trinity Minha describes as talking nearby. Nevertheless, I would claim that the work of the newsreel front tries to obtain some other components besides the dry role of informing about the intolerable reality. Meaning that it tries to incorporate self-reflection, is daring to experiment with the visual material, has a desire for playing with images and words, and it's also daring to fail. It means daring in images and words. Desiring for more adequate image, which is understood as a work that creates breaks and enables new forms of sensation. In this way, newsreel front imagines and thinks about a new image and a new experience, and understands the juxtaposition of fragments, images, and statements as a production of a different knowledge and a formation of new views that change the sensory dimension of the perception of world and its events that inhabits our bodies and our lives. So, this was a very short presentation on how newsreel front works, how what we are striving for, what we are wishing when we are doing our work. And for the end, I would like to show you an excerpt from a new video that will be premiered tomorrow in an exhibition in Ljubljani. And it's titled Newsreel 62, Family and Worker.
50 let kasneje na mejah držav evropskega kontinenta delavce in družine lomijo z zapletenimi postopki. Na njih se lomi identiteta družine, delavca ali umetnika. Lomi se zgodovinski spomin, dostojanstvo, lomijo jim kosti. Nastavljajo jim birokratske pasti, rezilne žice, na njih spuščajo pse, na njihovih kosteh lomijo pendreke. V njih lučajo dimne bombe, vanje spuščajo električne šoke. Brezsramno jih gledajo v oči, ko z zadnjimi močmi dvigujejo glave, preden zavedno izginejo v globine Sredozemskega morja. Kakšna je bila ta podoba družine in kakšna je bila podoba delavca? Kakšno podobo si sploh lahko zamišljamo danes, ko je pol stoletja od razstave z zemljevida izbrisana Jugoslavija in ko se z njega briše Sirija? Podoba v svetu, ki je vse bolj podoben brezsvetju. Leto 2015. Podobe se odvrtijo še enkrat. Zlizane. Videli smo jih že 1000-krat. Vsakič, ko izrečejo ilegalka, begunka, migrantka, tista, ki ni in ki ne bo, beseda razreže sliko. Obris te podobe je motnja. Rez. Ni več zgodbe o srečelovu. Zremo v zgodbo o nesrečelovu. To je zgodba o lovu na podobo, o iskanju podobe v brezsvetju, ki je vse bolj podoben svetu. Glavni dobitek, soderka, mi.